We have in the studio with us the Australia High Commissioner to Nigeria, Paul Lemon, to talk to us more about this. Thank you for joining us, Paul.
Good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right, tell us first off about the ADU, the prospects of it, and what you hope to achieve by that.
Well, ADU, which is Africa Down Under, is happening at the end of August every year. And this is a major mining conference which involves representatives from countries across Africa, but also mining investors and companies from Australia getting together to talk about the prospects for greater interchange and investment in the extractive sector in Africa.
All right, with about $350 million trade volume between Nigeria and Australia, one would say that's really little. That's quite little comparative to the friendship that exists between, or the relation between Australia and Nigeria.
I think what's happened with our trade and investment figures, it's very volatile. They do go up from year to year and come down.
Well, why is that?
It's mainly because of the commodity-based nature of that exchange. So when oil markets or wheat markets are going through their cycles, you'll see great fluctuations in the trade and investment numbers. In fact, our most recent figures have a big spike in that number, coming up towards 1 billion Australian dollars, which would make Nigeria Australia's second largest two-way trading partner in Africa. So, and then the next year it may go down because the oil market has dictated another purchase. So what we would like to do, and it's consistent with the Nigerian government policy, is to diversify the nature of that trade and investment relationship to include a greater number of services and a greater number of sectors, so that figure continues to grow, but it grows in a way that's more textured and more sustainable.
Okay, so let's look at mining now, which of course wasn't really tapped up until this administration that is giving attention to the mining sector. And with this coming up now, what do you think Australia and Nigeria can achieve, working on the prospects of mining in the country?
Well, what Australia can bring to the table is expertise and a history of being able to deliver projects in difficult, often remote areas, and with skill sets that are sometimes not available locally. But part of our broader engagement is to see that the benefits of that exchange or investment are spread more broadly, so that Nigeria is able to develop an indigenous industry with expertise here. It's part of the reason why we maintain a scholarships program, which you mentioned in your introduction, but also encouraging companies who are coming here to operate in a way that is respectful of local conditions and also ensuring that benefits flow through to local communities. So it's a multifaceted approach, if you like, that we try and encourage from the Australian government's point of view when it comes to mining investment in Nigeria and in Africa.
All right, the African Down Under Conference, you say is a yearly event that takes place in August. Now, over the years, how would you assess the benefits so far to both countries, or the success of the Africa Down Under Conference?
Well, I think the success of the conference is reflected in the fact that Australian companies are some of the biggest investors across the continent in the extractive sector. So, right up there in the top 2 or 3 in terms of foreign investment in Africa. As you mentioned, Nigeria has been less part of that picture in recent decades, but we see that that's an opportunity for change, and I know that many Nigerians agree with me with that, and a lot of work has gone into restructuring the regulatory settings and the policy settings in order to encourage that investment, and we're very happy to sort of participate with the Nigerian government in those efforts so that investment is attracted and benefits can flow to all parties.
So how have Nigerians benefited from the Australian scholarship program you talked about earlier?
Well, we've made, since 2010, we've awarded about 350 scholarships, which is a mix of master's level scholarships and also short courses and awards. So this year we're looking to award around 20 or so master's scholarships and about the same number of short courses. These are targeted to areas that are specific to Nigeria's priorities. So we talked a little about the mining
Like,
extractives,
okay.
but also in agriculture, public policy, public health, and the like. So it's part of our relationship is to work with Nigeria to unleash some of the massive potential that's here in human capital. And I'm very proud to say that Nigerians do extremely well with these scholarships, and more broadly in the education sector, which is another priority area for Australia. We're seeing increasing numbers of Nigerians who are choosing to study in Australia under their own steam. Your viewers may be interested to know that Australia is the country with the third highest number of international students in the world.
Really?
Wow. That's
So
interesting.
Nigerians are picking up on that. We have, by some measures, I think 6 of our universities in the top 100 according to the Times survey. So our education is a very high quality product, and Nigerians who are studying there or students from around the world do very well and rate their experience very highly. But particularly Nigerians, I don't know, there must be something about the way we can get good jollof rice on the table in Australia.
You just have to go there.
No, that is really interesting. Now, besides the issue of scholarship, are there also opportunities for internship and youth exchange in the area of cultural exchange?
Well, there's always those opportunities, and it's one of the things I want to do, as well as broadening and deepening the trade and investment relationship. There's looking ahead, broadening and deepening the cultural relationship and relationships between our institutions, whether they be scientific or research or artistic. There's a bit of a way to go there. I think there's, on both sides, the two countries, while having very warm and long-standing relationships, there's lots of territory to explore. So we're looking to promote that as much as we can, looking to the Nigerian and African diaspora in Australia to help us build those links as well.
Okay. There was Australia-Nigeria Trade Investment Council. Is that still functional? And if so, what are the activities being carried out?
Well, we have that. It exists in the sense that the Australian companies that are here are now working within that framework of very much wanting to engage with the Nigerian government directly. So in a sense, the activity is around direct engagement. We're expecting, though, that in Perth, in Australia, at the end of this month, or end of August, I should say, for Africa Down Under and Australia Africa Week, for even more formalisation of those ties to be discussed and to be furthered.
All right. Now, talking about Africa Down Under Conference, where mining is part of one of the priorities of strengthening relations and ties and business between both countries. Can you talk to us, has there been any tangible agreements so far in the area of the companies that will be involved in, and then what dates to start and what frameworks you're working on?
There certainly are Australian mining companies here, and they're working very hard to move their projects towards production phase. I'm probably not the best person to ask about exact dates and the like, but you know, we are in touch regularly with those companies and indeed with the state governments and the federal government authorities who are working with them towards production phase, if you like. And you know, for me, it's less important that we have vast, you know, big bang announcements or big promotions. It's more, let's get started with things that are tangible and to show, demonstrate a track record of success, and that success will then encourage others to look towards this part of the world.
Okay.
Okay.
But what area of mining specifically are they?
Well, the thing about Nigeria is that because it's been relatively untapped, what's happening now is discoveries are being made of very, very high grade ore. So the difference here is the quality or the grade of the minerals that are available. And that alone attracts attention. So I'm not an expert in all of the different geology and mineralogy of it all, but I do know that what interests Australian companies and indeed companies from other parts of the world is the quality of the ore, particularly as the demand mix globally continues to change with the development of, or the demand for batteries, for storing energy, renewable energy and the like. So those minerals are now more and more in demand. So it's one to watch. It really is. I think Nigeria is well placed to participate in that market.
All right, so we've been talking about how Nigeria can benefit, from this trade ties and all that. What about Australia? Not what Australia would gain now in terms of money and other benefits, but what would Australia gain, get from Nigeria as taking back? So at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like a unidirectional exchange. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Well, I do,
Yeah.
and precisely. And look, one of the things that we promote broadly across the world is an open, rules-based international system for trade and investment. So looking to reduce barriers to trade and encouraging that free trade to occur across continents and between continents. So, this is part of our approach, is to try and encourage that. For Australia, I mean, we are an island continent, a resource-based exporting commodity-based economy, and we have had to develop our country on the basis of free trade and looking to trade with other parts of the world, primarily in our immediate region, but further abroad, further afield, on the basis of access to markets, but also trade based on rules that enable that trade to happen with as fewer barriers as possible.
So in all of this move towards enhancing relations between both countries, what level of cooperation are you getting from the Nigerian authorities and agencies that are supposed to enhance the relation and also the trade relations?
I have to say that it's been one of the great pleasures of my posting here in Nigeria, is to see the enthusiasm across industry, across business, across government for deepening the relationship between Nigeria and Australia. We've been fortunate to have some senior level visitors, or a good number of them, over the time that I've been in this post. Most recently we had even the Emir of Kano was in Australia. So, and talking business with the Australia-Africa Business Council in Melbourne and spreading the word. So I have to say it hasn't been difficult to generate that level of interest, and attendance at Africa Down Under and Australia Africa Week I expect will be good. I know that the Nigerian authorities are also looking at a roadshow of investors to travel to Australia to talk to potential investors as well. So it's all part of making those linkages. And I think one of the things that Australia and Nigeria have in common, and there are many, is that we're both countries that are outward looking. And so Australians and Nigerians like to do well internationally. And, so there's a natural fertile ground there for those connections to be made.
And talking about those connections, really, let's look at the long-term plan of these trade ties between the two countries. Would Australia still be looking at engaging with Nigeria on extractive basis, or would want to venture into other sectors in the future?
I think in the future the sky is the limit, but certainly for the immediate and the term, it's looking at where we can play to our strengths, and certainly in the extractive sector, in agriculture and agricultural development. I think there's plenty of opportunities there. We've talked about the education sector, but looking further ahead, sort of more exchange on downstream technologies, particularly in food industry and food and beverage, are things that we would like to see deepen. I mean, we're very aware of the trajectory that Nigeria is on. Nigeria has a big future, whichever way you look at it. And so it's a story that, we don't want to not be a part of from our part of the world. It's part of how it's our outlook to the world is to reach out. And geography for us does not need to be a barrier. And I think that Nigerians share that same outlook.
All right, talking about building capacity, the point there is Africa Down Under takes place in Australia, and there are lots of potentials within the African and within Nigeria, for instance, who may not have the ability or capacity or wherewithal to be in Australia to showcase what they have. Is there any plan to sometimes take the Africa Down Under conference to Africa, Nigeria, or any of the countries, maybe South Africa or Kenya or Tanzania sometime, so you can have access to the real other potentials and grassroots people who have what it takes as well?
Absolutely. I think there's a case for bringing Australia to Africa as well as Africa to Australia, and that does happen, including on other major mining conferences that occur every year on the continent. but also how we work with our trade and investment promotion authorities and encouraging companies to come here themselves. And for me and my colleagues to be out there and talking to industry, talking to government about these opportunities and making those connections. So yes, there is a case for that, for sure. I do agree with you.
Are there many Australian companies in Nigeria?
There's a modest number here, I have to say. But you know, it's all about where we can take that modest number and grow that, and looking at where we can leverage our expertise and specialities. So in the mining services sector, when you see developments taking hold here, companies that are expert in different types of services or consulting or equipment, being able to come in and supply the necessary means for those projects to get off the ground. I think that's where we will see the most growth.
Okay. Well, the relations between Nigeria and Australia is really growing, like you say, from statistics we're getting. But talking about the issue of assistance, in all of this trade relations and, you know, diversify the mind to diversify the economy, security is one major thing, especially in Nigeria right now. Is one of the challenges Nigeria is facing. Now, to ensure that all of this, you know, solid minerals investment and all of that work, is there any agenda that Australia has to assist Nigeria in the area of tackling security challenges?
Indeed. Well, Australia and Nigeria stand together in opposing all forms of radical and violent extremism, and we are politically aligned in our efforts to ensure that that scourge is eliminated. We are contributors to global funds that work in the areas of countering violent extremism, including here in Nigeria. So while we're not necessarily a bilateral donor in that sort of traditional sense, we certainly align with Nigeria's objectives to bring about peace across the region and not just in this country. We're very active in efforts in other parts of the world to combat violent extremism and to ensure that terrorism does not get a foothold. So Australia is an active international participant in those efforts.
And talking about that even further, would Australia be interested in engaging in FDIs, foreign direct investment, you know, coming here for the companies to come and set up, so that it's not just about giving services and then just go away and the kitchen becomes hot? You understand?
Yes, I understand. Well, the answer is yes. In my role as High Commissioner is to ensure that the connections are made and to encourage those investments to occur where it's appropriate. But I wouldn't be able to make any particular commitments about individual companies or investments, but certainly our commitment is to ensuring that the policy settings are right and that you know, Australian firms are aware of the opportunities here and vice versa. You know, our look is always to look ahead and to see where this country is going, and to look at the market and the demand for goods and services and where we can play a role. And I'm convinced that that's a story that has a long way to run and is a source of optimism for the future.
All right, let's talk about issues around entertainment and arts. It's going to be part of the Africa Down Under conference as well. It's one of the items there, one of the issues. I don't know how interesting Australians find African arts and entertainment. You may want to talk to us about that.
Well, you know, I think I'll start the answer to that question by just letting your viewers know that about a quarter of Australians were born overseas, and about half of them were either born overseas or had one or more parents born overseas. So we're an immigrant country. We are a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. It's our diversity is our strength, and I think I've seen figures that are around 500,000 Australians have African backgrounds, and you know, that's out of a relatively small population. Australia has a population about the size of Lagos, about 24 million people. You know, there is already a foothold in Australia of, and a tradition of linkages to Africa. Because of our geography, it's often been southern and eastern Africa that has the strongest cultural linkages. But increasingly with diasporas, including from Nigeria, there's more exposure to culture and to art and to music from this part of the world, which has an enormously, it's very well received in Australia. I know that in Melbourne, for example, they hold every year a week-long cultural event full of dance and music and art. Plenty of Nigerian participants in that festival, and you know, for us, celebrating the diversity of cultures from around the world and is part of who we are in Australia. So it's a great thing, and often for many people it's about discovering new cultures and new ways of expressing artistically.
And when it comes to entertainment, you know, Nigerians, in fact, I don't want to say number one, so it doesn't seem like we are bragging, but of course, Davido just got an award at BET for the best international act, you know, in Africa. But that aside, Nollywood is judged to be number 3 in the world after Hollywood and Bollywood. So when it comes to entertainment, really, Nigerians know how to show up.
Absolutely.
So how do you think that Australia would want to tap into this, maybe for collaboration of productions and all that?
I think this is a world that's emerging for discovery in Australia, and the good thing is there's enormous appetite, and there is a tradition in Australia of welcoming diversity of cultural and artistic expression, including in film and television. We have multicultural broadcasting that goes nationally, which taps into programming and to films and television from around the world. And you know, my experience is that Australians as a whole are very, very curious and welcoming of new formats, of new types of expression. And certainly since I've been here for the last 2.5 years, I have one of the real joys of being here is to explore and discover that variety of expression in art and in music and in film and television. And
in food?
And in food, absolutely.
You mentioned jollof rice earlier.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, now, still on the issue of entertainment, we have Mexican and Indian soaps and entertainment is quite popular in Nigeria and around the sub-Saharan Africa. Certainly, we've not seen a lot of Australian soaps or Australian programs and all of that. Is there any move to try to make Australian soaps or Australian entertainment present, like in Nigeria, for instance?
It's not something that I've noticed as a huge priority for at the moment, but I certainly would like to see more of that two-way exchange. And one of the things, a way to start that potentially for us has been to showcase some of our Indigenous art. So Australia has an Indigenous heritage which goes back 60,000 years, some of the oldest continuous cultures in the world, and with the very, very rich artistic traditions and expression that we have, in our modest way through the High Commission, sought to showcase a little bit. So this is art from Australia's First Peoples that may not have been seen here. So as a way to kind of build that cultural bridge, we're looking at having opportunities to display that work and to give Nigerians a new insight into what art and culture is in Australia.
A good example could be Australia-Nigeria trade fair, kind of something that could hold in both countries, maybe simultaneously or alternatively. Anyhow, you think something like that could work to even promote the culture of these people even further? Absolutely,
and from time to time we do have visiting artists, and I would like to encourage more to come to Nigeria to showcase some of those traditions in artistic expression.
All right, I know you've been in Nigeria long enough to understand the cultural diversity that we have, which is a replica of what you have back in your country, in Australia. Australia has, from the records here, you have about, the ethnicities are broken. British ethnicity has about 67%, Irish 8.7%, Italian 3%, German 3%, Chinese 3%, and then the Aboriginal native Australians about 3%, which is really interesting. It's part of what we have in here, but we don't often hear of conflicts between ethnicities in Australia. In fact, like you said earlier on, the variety is actually the strength of the country. Now, what advice would you have for Nigeria in that regard when it comes to ethnicities dwelling and working together?
Well, that's a very good point. And, you know, Australia is regarded as one of the world's most successful multicultural projects, if you like. That's not to say that we've got everything right or things are perfect in Australia. And we don't really pretend to have wisdom that we can dictate to others. But I would say that for us, focusing on dialogue, respectful dialogue and exchange between different communities, whether they're recently arrived or have been established for longer periods, is really key. And to ensure that the institutions of state are robust in order to support that sort of diversity in community makeup. So, if you like, ensuring that our political systems and our court our legal systems and the like are fundamentally strong to cope with all of the tensions, if you like, and the pushing and pulling that comes with different community interests in competition sometimes. But also it's about ensuring that Australians have a sense of our national identity and our national purpose as one country. So that's, you know, we live on a vast continent. It's, you know, something almost 8 million square kilometres and a small population, really. So for us, coming together is really a matter of you know, ensuring our national project succeeds and we can build on that success by coming together.
All right, finally, what achievements have you made since Africa Down Under started?
I think the achievements really are about the level of mining investment across Africa and also, I have to say, an increased profile for what Nigeria can offer. You know, this will be my 3rd conference coming up at the end of August, and even over that relatively short period, I've seen an increase in the reporting of Nigeria and what is on offer here in the extractive sector, and greater exposure to the potential for greater investment in that sector.
Okay.
All right, we have to leave you here now. We've been talking with Paul Leman, Australian High Commissioner to Nigeria. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Right.